My brothers and sisters, hear me today. There comes a time in life when you have to step away. You have to retreat. You have to disappear, not because you are defeated, but because you are being developed. See, life will put you in a place where you must go into hiding, not because you're weak, but because God is working on you in the dark. Just like a seed in the soil, growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in the unseen places. Some of you are in a season where God is saying, step back, lay low. Be still, but don't mistake the silence for stagnation. Don't mistake the hiddenness for hopelessness. This is where transformation begins, when a caterpillar enters the cocoon. It is not dying, it is evolving. It is not being buried, it is being birthed into something greater. And that's what God is doing with you. You are not forgotten, you are being formed. And when you rebuild, when you rebuild, you will rise up with wings like eagles. You will come out stronger, wiser, sharper, and more anointed than ever before. What used to break you will now build you. What used to shake you will now strengthen you. Because when God brings you back, you will return with power, vision, and divine authority. You're coming back better than before. You're coming back ready. You're coming back unshakable, unstoppable, and undeniable. There comes a moment in life when the noise is too loud, the distractions too many, and the weight of expectations too heavy. It is in those moments that God whispers, step away. Now, hear me when I say this: stepping away is not weakness. It is not failure. It is not giving up. Stepping away is strategic. It is a divine move, a necessary shift, a repositioning for what is about to come. But too many people misunderstand this process. They think that if you're not visible, if you're not posting, if you're not talking, if you're not showing up in every room, then you must be losing. They think that silence means surrender. But let me tell you something, some of the most powerful victories don't happen in the spotlight. They happen in the secret place. See, the world has conditioned us to believe that movement equals progress. That as long as you're busy, as long as you're hustling, as long as you're showing up, then you must be doing something right. But let me ask you, what if your greatest growth happens when you stop? What if your biggest breakthrough happens when you step away? When Jesus was on his journey, there were moments when he pulled away from the crowds. He stepped away from the noise. He separated himself even from the disciples to go and be alone with the Father. Now, if Jesus himself had to withdraw, then what makes you think you don't? Some of you are afraid of stepping away because you think people will forget you. You think opportunities will pass you by. You think the world will move on without you. But let me tell you something, what is meant for you will never miss you. What God has for you is not based on the opinions of people. It is not tied to the approval of man. It is not dependent on you being seen. Because if you are in alignment with God's plan, your season of stepping away will be the very thing that prepares you for the grace comeback of your life. Stepping away is strategic because it allows God to work on you without the world watching. Have you ever seen a construction site? When builders are working on a new project, they put up barriers around it. They cover it, they keep it hidden. Why? Because the foundation must be laid before the structure can rise. The world is not ready to see it yet because it is still under development. If they saw it too soon, they might judge it too early. They might underestimate it. They might not see the full vision. Some of you are trying to build in front of people who don't even understand the blueprint of what God is doing in your life. And because they don't understand, they criticize, they mock, they question, they say, where did they go? Why are they so quiet? Why aren't they doing what they used to do? But let me tell you, the greatest things take place in the secret place. Moses stepped away to meet God on the mountain. When he returned, his face was radiating with the glory of God. He disappeared into the presence of God, and when he came back, he was transformed. When Joseph was thrown into the pit and later the prison, he was removed from the public eye, but it was in those hidden places that God was preparing him for the palace. You cannot rise until you are refined. You cannot build until you are broken. You cannot lead until you have learned how to listen. And sometimes that means you have to step away. See, the enemy will try to convince you that stepping away is losing ground. That if you take a break, you'll fall behind. That if you pause, someone else will take your place. But the devil is a liar. The truth is, stepping away is not about losing, it's about repositioning. Let me put it this way, have you ever watched a game of chess? A wise player does not just move forward blindly. A wise player sometimes moves backward in order to position themselves for a greater victory. A wise player does not just rush ahead, they move with strategy. This is what stepping away is about. It is not about hiding, it is about preparing. It is about learning, it is about listening. It is about strengthening, because when you step away, you get time to do what you could never do in the midst of the chaos. Some of you have been running on empty. You've been pouring out, giving, pushing, striving, stretching, but you have not taken the time to be refilled. And let me tell you, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Even Jesus, when he performed miracles, when he healed the sick, when he preached to the multitudes after all of that, he stepped away to be restored. Because you cannot keep giving without first being filled. Stepping away is strategic because it allows you to realign with your purpose. Some of you are so caught up in the routine of life that you've lost sight of why you even started. You're doing things out of habit, but not out of conviction. You're moving, but you're not growing. You're busy, but you're not effective, and that's why God is calling you to step away so that he can reset you. See, when you step away, you gain clarity. You begin to see things differently. You start to understand things that you couldn't see before. Because sometimes you're too close to them to recognize the solution. You ever been working on something so long that your eyes get tired? You've been staring at the same thing for hours, but the moment you step away and come back, suddenly you see what you were missing. That's what stepping away does. It allows you to come back with fresh eyes, with a renewed spirit, with a sharpened vision. Some of you have been so immersed in the battle that you have forgotten the strategy. You've been so caught up in the fight that you have lost sight of the victory. And that is why God is telling you step away. Regroup, recharge, refocus. Because when you will return with power. When you return, you will return with wisdom. When you will return with authority. And those same people who thought you disappeared, those same people who thought you were finished, they will have no choice but to recognize the new version of you. So step away. Not in fear, but in faith. Not because you're running, but because you're rebuilding. Not because you're lost, but because you are being led. Because when you step away with purpose, you will return with power. Somebody say, I'm stepping away from my comeback. Somebody say, my pause is my power. Somebody say, I'm coming back stronger, wiser, and ready for my next level. This speech carries the fire, authority, and passion of a TD. Jake-style sermon while staying on theme. Would you like me to tweak anything or add even more depth? It doesn't happen in the spotlight. It doesn't happen when everyone is watching. It doesn't happen when the crowd is cheering. It happens in the hidden places, in the quiet moments, in the seasons when nobody knows your name, when nobody is calling your phone, when nobody is inviting you into the room. You don't grow in the light, you are revealed in the light, but growth happens in the dark. Look at the way God designed nature. When a seed is planted, it doesn't grow above the soil first. It grows underground. It grows in a place where nobody can see it. It grows in the dirt. It grows in the darkness, and for a season, it looks like nothing is happening. For a season, it seems like the seed has been buried, forgotten, cast aside. See, some of you are in a dark season right now. A season where you feel hidden. A season where you feel overlooked. A season where you feel forgotten. But let me tell you, you are not buried, you are being prepared. Before the world was formed, before the stars lit up the sky, before the sun took its place, there was darkness. Genesis 1:2 tells us that darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface. Did you hear that? Before there was light, God was already working in the dark. And the same is true for you. Just because you can't see what's happening doesn't mean God isn't moving. Just because you don't have the answers yet doesn't mean God isn't making a way. Just because you feel hidden doesn't mean God has forgotten you. Look at a baby in the womb. A mother carries that child for 9 months, but the baby doesn't grow in the open. The baby doesn't grow in the light. The baby doesn't grow where people can see it. That child is formed in the darkness of the womb. God is growing you the same way. He is shaping you. He is molding you. He is forming you into what He has called you to be. And just like a baby can't be rushed out of the womb before it's time, you can't be rushed into your destiny before you are ready. See, too many people want the promise without the process. They want the reward without the refinement. They want the platform without the preparation. But God doesn't work that way. He knows that if you step into the light before you've been developed in the dark, you won't be able to sustain what He has for you. Some of you are asking God, why am I in this season? Why am I struggling? Why does it feel like nothing is happening for me? But God is saying, I am preparing you. I am growing you. I am strengthening you. But I have to do it in the dark because you are not ready to be seen yet. Before David ever became king, he was a shepherd boy in the fields. He was tending sheep while his brothers were on the battlefield. He was being faithful in a place where nobody could see him, but God saw him. God was developing him in the dark. God was training him in the fields before he placed him in the palace. Before Joseph became the second in command of Egypt, he was thrown into a pit. He was sold into slavery. He was locked up in a prison. He spent years in places where nobody could see him. But what looked like a setback was really a setup, because in those dark places, Joseph developed his gift. He grew in wisdom. He grew in patience. He grew in character. And when the time was right, God pulled him out of the dark and placed him in a position of position. Before Jesus stepped into his ministry, before he performed a single miracle, before he preached to the crowds, he spent 30 years in obscurity, 30 years in the dark, 30 years being prepared, because even the Son of God had to go through a process before stepping into his purpose. So why do we think we can skip the process? Why do we resist the dark seasons of our lives? Why do we complain when we feel hidden? What if instead of asking God, why am I in the dark, you started asking God, what are you teaching me in the dark? What if instead of resisting the process, you embraced it? Because when you grow in the dark, you develop deep roots. Have you ever seen a tree in the middle of a storm? The wind is blowing, the rain is pounding, but that tree doesn't fall. Why? Because it has deep roots. It has been planted in the ground long enough for its foundation to be strong. But if you try to rush growth, if you try to force something to grow too fast, it won't have deep roots. And when the storms come, it will collapse because it wasn't strong enough to stand. God doesn't want that for you. That's why he allows you to go through the dark season. That's why he allows you to feel hidden. That's why he doesn't let you step into the light before you are ready. Because he wants your roots to be strong. He wants your foundation to be unshakable. He wants you to be able to stand when the storms of life come. So don't despise the dark. Don't fight the process. Don't rush what God is doing in you, because when the time is right, you will emerge. When the time is right, you will step into the light. When the time is right, everything that God has been growing in you will be revealed. And when you step into that moment, people will look at you and say, where did they come from? How did they grow so much? How did they get that kind of wisdom, that kind of strength, that kind of power? I grew when nobody was watching. I grew when people counted me. I grew when I felt forgotten. I grew when I wanted to quit, but God kept me. I grew when I thought I was buried, but God was planting me. And now that I have been prepared, I am ready to step into everything God has for me. Somebody shout, I'm growing in the dark. Somebody shout, this season is my preparation. Somebody shout, when I emerge, I will be stronger, wiser, and unshakable. This is a fiery, powerful sermon style expansion of growth happens in the dark that keeps the passion and intensity of a TD. Jake style message. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks or additions. A season where the people you once depended on are no longer there. A season where the familiar places no longer feel comfortable. A season where the doors that used to open for you suddenly close. And if you're not careful, you will mistake this season of isolation for rejection. You will think that God has abandoned you, that people have forgotten you, that your purpose has been delayed. But I came to tell you today, your isolation is not rejection. Your isolation is preparation. See, we live in a world that glorifies connection. Everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be known. Everyone wants to be in the right rooms with the right people at the right time. But what if I told you that God does his greatest work in you when nobody is watching? The wilderness is where warriors are formed. The hidden place is where leaders are shaped. The secret place is where destinies are developed. Isolation is not punishment. It is the preparation for elevation. When God is about to do something great in your life, he will pull you away from distractions. He will pull you away from the noise. He will pull you away from the crowd. Not because he is trying to hurt you, but because he is trying to prepare you. If you look at the Word of God, you will see a pattern. Every person that God used mightily had to go through a season of isolation before stepping into their assignment. Before Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. 40 years, that's an entire lifetime. He was once a prince in Pharaoh's palace, but then he found himself tending sheep in a foreign land. He went from being surrounded by wealth and power to being alone in the desert. God was stripping away his old identity. God was teaching him humility. God was shaping his character. And when the time was right, God called him out of isolation and sent him to deliver an entire nation. Before Joseph stepped into the palace, he was thrown into a pit. Before he became second in command of Egypt, he was sold into slavery. Before he was given a position of power, he was locked up in prison. Joseph went through years of isolation. His family turned their backs on him. He was falsely accused. He was forgotten by the very people he helped. But what looked like isolation was actually God's divine preparation. Because while Joseph was alone, God was sharpening his leadership skills. God was teaching him wisdom. God was molding his heart. And when the season of preparation was over, Joseph was ready to step into a position that would save an entire generation. Some of you feel like Joseph right now. You feel like you've been thrown into a pit. You feel like you've been overlooked. You feel like you've been locked away while others are moving forward. But I came to tell you your isolation is not the end of your story, it's just the beginning. Before David became king, he was just a shepherd boy in the fields. He was tending sheep while his brothers were being trained as warriors. He was out in the wilderness while his family was inside the house. It didn't look like he was going anywhere. It didn't look like he was being prepared for anything great. But while he was alone, he was developing the very skills he would need to defeat Goliath. While he was isolated, he was learning how to fight battles in secret so he could win victories in public. When the time came for him to step into his destiny, he was ready because his season of isolation had been his season of preparation. You feel like you've been placed in the background while others are being promoted? You feel like you've been forgotten while others are being celebrated? But what you don't realize is that God is training you in the dark so that when you step into the light, you will be unstoppable. He spent 40 days fasting. He spent 40 days in solitude. He spent 40 days being tempted by the enemy. And when he came out of that season, he walked in power. His isolation was the final step before his elevation. So why do we think we can step into our purpose without going through the same process? Why do we resist the seasons when God is pulling us away? Why do we fight to hold on to relationships that God is trying to remove? Why do we try to force open doors that God has closed for a reason? Could it be that your isolation is not meant to hurt you, but to prepare you? God is pulling you away because he needs your attention. He needs you to let go of distractions. He needs you to stop relying on people. He needs you to hear his voice above all others. Because when you step into your calling, you cannot afford to be dependent on the opinions of people. You cannot afford to be controlled by validation. You cannot afford to be weak in your foundation. So don't despise this season. Don't resist what God is doing. Don't waste your preparation period. Because when God brings you out of this season, you will be stronger, wiser, and ready for everything he has promised. And you will say, I was in my season of isolation that God transformed me. It was in my hidden place that God developed me. It was when I was alone that I became everything he created me to be. So if you are in that place right now, don't lose hope. Don't get discouraged. Your preparation season is proof that something greater is on the way. God is about to open doors that no man can shut. God is about to take you from the background to the forefront. And when he does, you will be able to stand strong because you have been prepared in the secret place. Somebody shout, my isolation is my preparation. Somebody shout, God is working on me in the hidden place. Somebody shout, when I come out, I will be stronger, wiser, and ready for my next level. This is a powerful, passionate, and lengthy sermon-style expansion on the topic of isolation leads to preparation in the fire of a TD, Jake-style message. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks or additional depth. The weight of trials, setbacks, disappointments, and delays feels overwhelming. The doors that once opened so easily now seem locked. The people who once stood beside you are nowhere to be found. And in those moments, it is easy to believe that you have been buried. You feel forgotten. You feel hidden. You feel like your purpose has been pushed underground, covered in darkness, trapped beneath the weight of trials and tribulations. But I came to tell you today, you are not buried, you are being born. What looks like the end is actually the beginning. What looks like death is actually the process of new life. What looks like confinement is actually God's setup set for your emergence. See, there's a difference between being buried and being planted. To the untrained eye, they look the same. When you put something in the ground, it disappears. It is covered, it is unseen. But the difference is when something is buried, it is meant to stay in the ground. When something is planted, it is meant to rise again. A seed goes into the ground not to die, but to be transformed. It is placed in darkness, not to be forgotten, but to grow. The dirt is not its grave, it is its womb. The seed must break open before it can sprout. It must go through a process of transformation before it can rise. It must endure the pressure of the soil before it can push through to the surface. What you thought was the end of your dreams, the end of your purpose, the end of your joy was just the beginning of your breakthrough. The darkness is not your burial ground, it is your birthing place. Think about the way a child enters the world. A baby is formed in the darkness of the womb. It is hidden for 9 months, unseen by the world, growing in a place of isolation. No one sees the development. No one witnesses the stretching. No one feels the transformation but mother and the child. But when the time comes when the process is complete, the baby is not buried. The baby is born. And when that baby enters the world, it doesn't come quietly. It comes with a cry, a sound, a declaration that new life has arrived. Some of you are in that process right now. You feel confined. You feel uncomfortable. You feel the pressure of being in a dark place. But what if I told you that the pressure is proof that something new is about to be birthed in you? Before he was placed in the palace, he was thrown into a pit. Before he ruled in Egypt, he was locked in a prison. He spent years hidden away, forgotten by men, but never forgotten by God. Before Moses became the deliverer of Israel, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. He went from the palace to the backside of the desert, tending sheep in a place where no one knew his name before Jesus stepped into his ministry. He spent 30 years in obscurity. Before he performed miracles, he spent 40 days in the wilderness. And before his resurrection, he spent 3 days in a tomb. If you feel hidden right now, if you feel overlooked, if you feel like the world has forgotten you, you are exactly where God wants you to be. This is where God strengthens your roots. This is where he deepens your foundation. This is where he prepares you for the weight of the destiny he has placed on your life. See, if God took you to the spotlight too soon, the pressure would crush you. If a tree grows too quickly without deep roots, it falls in the first storm. But if it takes time to grow beneath the surface, no storm can shake it. God is using this season to develop you in ways that no one else can see. Do not despise your hidden season. Do not resist your growth process. Do not mistake God's preparation for rejection. Because when the time is right, when the process is complete, when the transformation is finished, you will rise. But before a seed breaks through the soil, it must first break open beneath the surface. Before a baby is born, the mother must go through labor. Before resurrection comes, the crucifixion must happen. Some of you are feeling the pain of the breaking right now. The breaking of old mindsets, the breaking of unhealthy relationships, the breaking of familiar routines. What looks like destruction is actually construction. What looks like loss is actually gain. What looks like an ending is actually a beginning. When a seed finally breaks through the soil, it doesn't stay small. It begins to grow. It begins to stretch. It begins to reach toward the sky. When a baby is born, it doesn't stay in the womb. It enters the world full of life, ready to fulfill its purpose. When Jesus rose from the grave, he didn't stay in the tomb. He stepped out in victory, conquering death, hell, and the grave. And soon, what was once thought to be over became the greatest comeback in history. You have been hidden. You have been planted. You have gone through the process. You are about to step into everything God has been preparing for you. You are about to walk in power. You're about to walk in purpose. You're about to step into the fullness of who God created you to be. Somebody shout, I'm not buried, I'm being birthed. Somebody declare, this is my season of emergence. Somebody proclaim, when I rise, I will rise in power and strength and in purpose. There comes a time in life when what once stood strong begins to crumble. A time when the foundation you trusted suddenly seems weak. A time when relationships you thought would last forever fall apart. A time when the career, the plans, the dreams, and even the vision you once held on to begin to shift, break, or even disappear. And in those moments, it is easy to feel like all is lost. It is easy to feel defeated, discouraged, and uncertain about the future. But let me tell you, just because something has been broken doesn't mean it's the end. See, sometimes God allows things to fall apart, not to destroy you, but to give you the opportunity to rebuild on a stronger foundation. Sometimes He lets old things crumble so that new things can be established. Sometimes He allows the breaking so that a better version of you, a stronger version of you, a wiser version of you can rise from the ruins. Look throughout Scripture and you'll see that rebuilding is part of the process for anyone who is destined for greatness. Before God could build a great nation through Abraham, Abraham had to leave everything he knew and start over in a land he had never seen. Before Joseph could walk in his purpose, everything in his life had to be torn down: his position, his comfort, his relationship, so that God could build him back up as a leader fit to rule Egypt. Before Nehemiah could rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, he had to see the ruins, weep over them, and commit to the work of restoration. Before Jesus rose from the grave in victory, his body had to be broken. His followers had to experience loss. His disciples had to watch everything they believed in seem to fall apart. He takes what has been torn down and builds it back up stronger, greater, and better than before. Sometimes we try to hold on to things that were never meant to last. We cling to old structures, old mindsets, old ways of thinking, and old relationships that no longer serve our purpose, not because He wants to hurt us, but because He knows we cannot build something new while still holding on to what it was. You cannot build a new house on a broken foundation. You cannot step into your next season carrying the weight of the last one. You cannot embrace what's ahead if you're still clinging to what's behind. That is why a season of rebuilding is necessary. Because in rebuilding, we let go of what no longer serves us. In rebuilding, we strengthen our foundation. In rebuilding, we prepare ourselves for something greater. The pain of breaking precedes the power of building. Let's be real, rebuilding isn't easy. It requires effort. It requires patience. It requires faith. It means looking at the broken pieces of your life and believing that something greater can still come from them. It means trusting that the God who allowed certain things to fall apart is the same God who will give you the wisdom, strength, and resources to stay back up. It means refusing to quit just because you're in a season of ruins. When Nehemiah went back to Jerusalem, the walls were in shambles. The city was in ruins. The people were discouraged, but Nehemiah didn't sit there and mourn forever. He didn't look at the destruction and say, it's too late. He gathered the people. He organized the work. He faced opposition. He pushed through discouragement, and because he refused to give up, what was once a pile of rubble became a restored city with fortified walls. What is broken in your life right now? What feels like it has crumbled beyond repair? What dreams, what relationships, what opportunities seem to have been torn down? I came to tell you it's not over. Yes, it's broken, but it can be rebuilt. Yes, you've lost some things, but God can restore. Yes, it looks like the enemy has won, but if you have the faith to rebuild, you will see the hand of God move in ways you never imagined. If you're in a season of rebuilding, let me give you 3 key principles to hold on to. You cannot move forward if you keep looking back. Yes, acknowledge the loss, but don't dwell on it. Shift your focus from what's gone to what God is trying to do now. Before you can rebuild, you need to make sure your foundation is solid. In other words, before God blesses you with something new, He wants to make sure your heart, your mind, and your spirit are in the right place. If your last season broke you, let this season strengthen you. If your last relationship hurt you, let this season heal you. If your last failure shook your confidence, let this season rebuild your faith. Rebuilding takes time. It won't happen overnight. Brick by brick, piece by piece, step by step, God is putting things back together. Don't rush it. Don't get discouraged. Trust that every moment of rebuilding is a step toward restoration. I know it's been hard. I know it feels like you've lost too much. I know it seems like what was torn down will never be the same. But hear me today, God is not finished with you. Your best days are not behind you, they are ahead of you. What was broken will be rebuilt. What was lost will be restored. What looked like the end is about to be the beginning of something greater. This is your season of rebuilding. This is your season of restoration. This is your season of stepping into everything God has planned for you. So stand up, wipe your tears, get ready to rebuild. Because when God is done, what you thought was the end will be the foundation of something greater than you ever imagined. Society tells us that progress is all about doing more, chasing more, working harder, and running faster. We are conditioned to believe that if we are not constantly busy, then we must be falling behind. It is in the moments of stillness that you are renewed. It is in the quiet places that your spirit is fortified. It is in the seasons when God calls you to be still that He does His deepest work in you. See, there are times in life when God will intentionally pull you into a place of stillness, a place where He silences the noise, removes distractions, and slows down your pace not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because there are some battles you cannot fight in your own strength. There are some storms you cannot overcome by sheer willpower. There are some seasons where the only way to move forward is to stop striving, be still, and let God work. For many, stillness feels unnatural. We equate stillness with weakness, inactivity, or falling behind. But the truth is, stillness is not weakness, it is preparation. Look at the greatest warriors in history. Before they went into battle, they spent time in stillness. They trained, they waited, they listened. Look at an archer pulling back his bow before the arrow is released with great force and must first be drawn back into stillness. Look at a lion before it pounces, before it attacks. It crouches low, still, focused, waiting for the perfect moment. Stillness is not inactivity, it is strategic. It is a time of gathering strength, focusing vision, and preparing for what's ahead. Some of you have been feeling frustrated in your still season. You feel like nothing is moving. You feel like you're stuck. But what if I told you God has you in this season for a reason? He is not holding you back. He is pulling you back so that when He releases you, you will move forward with greater power, greater clarity, and greater authority than ever before. Throughout the Bible, we see that when God wanted to strengthen His people, He often called them into stillness first. When the Israelites were fleeing Egypt, they found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army. Fear took over. Chaos erupted. They wanted to fight, to do something, anything, and as they stood in stillness, God made a way where there was no way. The sea parted. The impossible became possible. Victory came not through their striving, but through their stillness and trust in God's power. Elijah was a mighty prophet, but after a great victory, he found himself exhausted, discouraged, and hiding in a cave. He expected God to come in a loud, dramatic display of power. But instead, God came to him in a still, small voice. It was in the quiet, in the stillness, that Elijah found the strength to continue his mission. Before Jesus stepped into his public ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness in stillness. No crowds, no miracles, no movement, just stillness before God. And when he emerged, he came forth full of power, ready to fulfill his purpose. Stillness is never wasted. It is in the stillness that God strengthens you for what's next. If you are in a season of stillness right now, let me tell you why it is necessary for your growth. When you never slow down, you burn out. When you never pause, you run dry. Even God rested on the seventh day. Sometimes God pulls you into stillness to refill what has been drained. You've been pouring out, but when was the last time you allowed God to pour back into you? You've been running, but when was the last time you sat at His feet and let Him reach on? The strength you need for the next season is found in the stillness of this season. The world is noisy. Social media, news, opinions, constant activity drowns out the voice of God. But when you are in stillness, when you shut off the noise, when you step away from the distractions, you can hear Him more clearly. God does His greatest work in you when He has your undivided attention. A bow must be pulled back before it can be launched forward. An eagle must sit and wait for the right wind before it takes flight. A seed must stay buried in stillness before it breaks forth into growth. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it is the preparation for the right movement. God is preparing you for acceleration. But if you try to rush ahead before the time is right, you will not have the strength to sustain what He is bringing into your life. What to do in your season of stillness if God has called you into a season of stillness? Here's what you need to do. When Elijah stood still, he heard God's voice. When Jesus spent time in stillness, He stepped into power. What if the breakthrough you're praying for is on the other side of your stillness? What if the strength you need is not in doing more, but in being still and trusting more? God is saying, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10, stillness is where he renews you. Stillness is where he speaks. Stillness is where he prepares you. Strength is not always found in movement. It is found in the stillness where God does his deepest work. So embrace this season. Rest in his presence. Trust his process. Because when he releases you, you will rise stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever before. Not a time when you feel like you've lost your momentum, your confidence, your vision, and maybe even yourself. Life has a way of knocking us down sometimes so hard that getting back up feels impossible. But I came to tell you today, your story is not over. Your return is coming. And when you return, you will be unstoppable. See, the enemy thought he had you. Life tried to break you. The trials, the betrayals, the setbacks, the disappointments, they all came to take you out. But what the enemy didn't realize is that you were not buried, you were planted. And when something is planted, it doesn't stay in the ground, it grows, it strengthens, and when it rises, it comes back greater than before. Your return is not just about recovering what was lost, it's about stepping into something greater than you ever imagined. What looked like your breaking point was actually your building point. What looked like your end was just your preparation for the next level. So get ready, because when you return, you will not be the same. You will be stronger, wiser, more focused, more anointed, and more powerful than ever before. And nothing will be able to stop you. Life has a way of making you feel like you've lost time, like you've wasted too many years in struggle, pain, and confusion, like you've been stuck while everyone else is moving forward. You may have been delayed, but you have not been denied. You may have been slowed down, but you have not been stopped. Because when God is in control, what looks like a delay is actually divine positioning. Look at Joseph, betrayed, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. If anyone had a reason to give up, it was Joseph. But what looked like setback after setback was actually God positioning him for a greater comeback. Because when his time came, Joseph didn't just return, he ruled. He didn't just recover, he was elevated. He didn't just survive, he stepped into purpose. And that same God who turned Joseph's pain into power, who turned his prison into a palace, is the same God who is working in your life. Don't let the delay make you doubt your destiny. Because when God is setting you up, your return will be greater than your departure. When you come back, you won't be the same person who left. The things that used to shake you won't shake you anymore. The people who doubted you will have to watch you walk in victory. The fears that used to control you will have no power over you anymore. Because in your season of being away, whether it was isolation, hardship, or struggle, God was working on you. He was refining you. He was stretching you. He was strengthening you. So when you return, you will not return as the same version of yourself. You will return stronger. You will return more disciplined. You will return with fresh vision. You will return with new fire. And when you walk back into the place where the enemy thought he left you broken, the enemy will have no choice but to step back, because your return will be unstoppable. When God has called you back, when he has strengthened you in the quiet places, when he has sharpened you in the hidden seasons, nothing will be able to stop what he is about to do in your life. They will question how you came back stronger after everything that was meant to break you. But what they won't understand is that God was always with you. They thought you were finished, but they didn't realize you were just getting started. They thought your season was over, but they didn't know God was just setting the stage for your next move. When you come back, doors that were once closed will suddenly open. Opportunities that you thought you lost will suddenly return. Everything the enemy tried to steal, God will restore and then some. Because when God brings you back, he doesn't just bring you back, he brings you back with double. Just like Job, who lost everything but received double for his trouble. Just like David, who went from hiding in caves to sitting on the throne. Just like Jesus, who was crucified, buried, but on the third day he rose with all power in his hands. Your return will be unstoppable because God is the one bringing you back. You thought your best days were behind you. No, your best days are still ahead. You thought the damage was too great. No, God is restoring you. There is still a calling on your life. There is still a purpose in your future. There is still power in your hands, and when you return, you will walk in that purpose like never before. Because the story isn't over. Your comeback is on the way, and when you return, you will be stronger. You will be wiser, you will be anointed, you will be unstoppable. So stand up, dry your tears, hold your head high, because what's coming next is greater than anything you've ever seen before. Your return will not be small. Your return will not be unnoticed. Your return will shake the very foundations of everything that tried to hold you back. The trials you've endured, the lessons you've learned, the strength you've gained in the dark places, they have transformed you. The enemy thought he broke you, but instead he built you. The enemy thought he buried you, but instead you were planted. Because the version of you that left was wounded, but the version of you that's returning is healed. The version of you that left was uncertain, but the version of you that's returning is bold. The version of you that left was insecure, but the version of you that's returning is anointed, focused, and unstoppable. When they see you walking in victory, they will ask, is that the same person we counted out? The same person we doubted? The same person we thought would never recover? And you will stand before them as living proof that God restores, God elevates, and God transforms, because when you step back into the place where the enemy tried to take you out,